Most failed and dangerous GM cars ever made. What were GM's designers thinking with these cars? Over the years, General Motors has rolled out some truly strange and spectacularly failed models that left even the most loyal fans scratching their heads. From wild experiments like the Dustbuster vans to retro flops like the Chevrolet HHR, these cars broke the mold, often in all the wrong ways. But what exactly went wrong? Why did these models, meant to be game changers, end up as some of the most failed GM cars ever made? In today's video, we're diving into the most failed and weirdest GM cars that left an unforgettable mark on automotive history. Stick around and let us know in the comments which model you think was the strangest or biggest flop. If you're a fan of wild car stories and want to keep exploring with us, make sure to like, share, and hit that follow button for more from Muscle Car Masters. Chevrolet Vega. Ever wonder how a promising car could nearly tank an automotive giant? The Chevrolet Vega is the story of how GM's attempt to create an affordable, American-made compact turned into a nightmare of recalls, rust, and engine issues. Marketed as GM's answer to the Volkswagen Beetle, the Vega was meant to be revolutionary with its aluminum block, 140 cubic inch and 2.3-liter inline-4 engine. Yet this innovation was also its downfall. The Vega's engine, notorious for its melting issues, lacked a coolant recovery tank in early models. Without adequate cooling, overheating was common, leading to warped cylinders and premature engine failure. Later attempts to fix it, including upgraded seals and cooling channels, came too late. The Vega's reputation was already shot. Adding to its woes, the Vega's thin sheet metal was poorly protected against rust, making the car infamous for severe corrosion. Front fenders sometimes rusted out within 2 winters in northern climates, while frame rust plagued many models, even in dry regions. And as if engine troubles and rust weren't enough, reports emerged of gas tank fires, adding a dangerous flaw to an already infamous vehicle. Besides, most people only focus on the main engine and forget that the Corvair's rear-mounted engine and swing-axle rear suspension also had serious problems. The Corvair featured a swing-axle rear suspension and an overhanging rear engine, creating a heavy rear bias that caused instability in cornering. The swing axle, a basic independent rear suspension design using arms mounted across the car, had been used in front-engine, rear-drive cars like the Triumph Spitfire. But in the Corvair, the rear engine exaggerated the issue, leading to dangerous oversteer and unpredictable steering. Despite Chevrolet's quick fix, a camber compensating spring to stabilize handling, the unsafe at any speed label stuck, halting innovation in American car design for decades. Chevrolet's knowledge of this flaw, yet pushing sportiness, sealed its fate. The Chevy Vega is now a rare sight on the roads, remembered as one of GM's biggest missteps. This most failed GM car left a legacy in automotive history, a cautionary tale of rushed innovation and quality control gone wrong. Chevrolet Corvair. Is there a car more famously controversial than the Chevrolet Corvair? This compact from GM had it all: innovation, intrigue, and a reputation that spiraled downhill after Ralph Nader's unsafe at any speed hit the shelves. But was it really the death trap people claimed? The Corvair was GM's answer to the Volkswagen Beetle, introducing a unique rear-mounted air-cooled flat-six engine. This engine, offered in various displacements, ranged from 80 to 180 horsepower and included turbocharged options for higher performance. With 6 body styles, from coupe to station wagon, the Corvair was an ambitious project meant to lure the thrift buyer looking for something compact yet stylish. Yet the Corvair's swing axle rear suspension was its Achilles' heel. Designed without a stabilizing anti-sway bar, the rear heavy layout often led to dangerous oversteer, particularly when owners failed to maintain GM's recommended tire pressure difference, half the pressure in the front tires compared to the rear. The result? Unstable handling that could lead to rollovers during sharp turns, especially at high speeds. Nader's book fueled public alarm, labeling the Corvair a one-car accident. Although GM addressed this with a fully independent rear suspension in 1965, the damage to the Corvair's reputation was done. Despite NHTSA investigations later clearing the Corvair's design as comparable to other cars of its time, sales plummeted. The Ford Mustang's arrival and the 1967 Camaro sealed its fate. Today, Corvairs are cherished by collectors, who defend them as misunderstood marvels of engineering. But the model remains one of GM's strangest and most failed experiments, embodying a cautionary tale in automotive history. Oldsmobile diesels. Was there ever a car engine that nearly single-handedly destroyed an entire brand's reputation? Enter the Oldsmobile diesel, a 5.7-liter V8 that was supposed to revolutionize fuel economy for GM's lineup, but instead became one of the most disastrous engines ever. The idea sounded great. A diesel V8 that could offer up to 30 miles per gallon, perfect for the fuel crisis era. But in practice, it was an absolute nightmare. Built from the architecture of Oldsmobile's gasoline 350 engine, the diesel conversion had some serious flaws. Diesel engines require high compression to ignite the fuel, but GM cut corners by reusing gas engine head bolts that simply couldn't handle the pressure. The result? Blown head gaskets, cracked blocks, and catastrophic engine failure were common. Early models didn't even include a water separator, leading to rusted fuel injectors and pumps as low-quality diesel fuel entered the system. With only 120 horsepower and 220 pound-feet of torque, this diesel wasn't a performance machine. Its poor power delivery, paired with slow acceleration, made driving these full-sized cars sluggish and frustrating. Worse, these engines rattled, spewed black smoke, and were prone to failing on cold mornings, forcing owners to wrestle with block heaters just to get them started. The public backlash was so severe that the Oldsmobile diesel was a driving force behind the creation of lemon laws in the U.S. GM did try to address these issues, improving the engine by 1981 with a stronger block and roller cam. But by then, the damage was done. Cadillac and other GM divisions that adopted the diesel lost loyal customers, and the engines were discontinued by 1985. This failed GM car experiment remains a textbook case of why cutting corners can lead to costly consequences in the automotive world. Cadillac Cimarron. When you think Cadillac, you imagine luxury, power, and prestige, not a rebadged compact car. So, what went wrong with the Cadillac Cimarron? Designed to compete with European imports like BMW's 3 Series, the Cimarron was Cadillac's rushed attempt at a luxury compact. But what GM delivered was more like a Chevrolet Cavalier in fancy clothes, leaving fans wondering if this was really Cadillac. Introduced in 1982 and built on GM's J platform, the Cimarron was meant to fill a growing demand for smaller luxury cars. But it wasn't initially supposed to be on the J platform, which was already shared by the budget-friendly Cavalier and Pontiac J2000. GM's president famously warned that Cadillac didn't have enough time to make the J car feel like a Cadillac. Despite these warnings, Cadillac pushed forward, launching the Cimarron with minimal changes from its lower-end cousins. The Cimarron's performance was another misstep. At launch, it came with an underwhelming 1.8-liter 4-cylinder engine that produced just 88 horsepower, resulting in a painful 0 to 60 mph time of around 16 seconds. Cadillac quickly replaced it with a 2.0-liter engine, but it still fell short of luxury expectations. Later models featured a 2.8-liter V6, but by then, the Cimarron's reputation was irreversibly tarnished. Priced at a staggering $12,000, the Cimarron's lack of power and barely upgraded interior left buyers feeling cheated. In fact, GM didn't initially label the Cimarron as a Cadillac, calling it instead Cimarron by Cadillac, to distance it from the brand's flagship cars. By the time improvements were made, sales had dwindled, and the Cimarron was quietly discontinued in 1988. Pontiac Aztek. Think of the weirdest car GM ever made, and the Pontiac Aztek probably tops the list. Designed to capture the hearts of adventurous young buyers, the Aztek's blend of bizarre styling and practical features has left an unforgettable mark on automotive history. But did GM's strange gamble actually pay off? The Aztek launched in 2001 as Pontiac's first foray into the emerging crossover market, a segment ripe for innovation. Under the hood, it packed a 3.4-liter V6 engine, producing 185 horsepower, a solid output for the time, capable of a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of 9.2 seconds. It wasn't particularly powerful, but it was reliable enough to avoid further criticisms. Offered with front-wheel drive as standard and an optional all-wheel drive system called VersaTrack, it aimed to give buyers some outdoor capability. But the minivan-based platform and awkward proportions made it look more like an alien minivan than a rugged SUV. GM's vision for the Aztek included a series of unique features: a removable center console that doubled as a cooler, a rear tailgate designed for tailgating complete with cup holders, and a tent accessory that transformed the Aztek into a camper. Inside, the roomy cabin offered nearly 94 cubic feet of cargo space, a heads-up display, and even a sliding cargo tray rated to hold up to 400 pounds. Despite these innovations, the Aztek's strange, almost Frankenstein-like design with plastic body cladding and sharp angles turned most buyers away. GM even tried to improve its look by making the cladding body-colored in later models, but sales still lagged. The Aztek's unveiling was as theatrical as its styling. Pontiac's brand manager staged a mosh pit at the 2000 Detroit Auto Show, hoping to hype up the car's youthful appeal. But the reaction was a mix of shock and amusement. Sales never met GM's expectations, and by 2005, the Aztek was quietly discontinued, having sold fewer than 30,000 units annually. Ironically, it found fame years later as Walter White's car in Breaking Bad, leading to a surprising cult following. Today, the Aztek stands as a lesson in automotive design, symbolizing how even the strangest and weirdest GM cars can eventually find love, albeit in the most unexpected ways. Pontiac Le Mans, Daewoo. How do you take a legendary name like the Pontiac Le Mans and turn it into one of GM's most infamous failures? Just rebadge a Korean import and hope no one notices. Originally an Opel Kadett, this version of the Le Mans was designed in Germany and assembled by Daewoo in South Korea. Launched in the US in 1988, it quickly became known as one of GM's biggest flops. Under the hood, the Le Mans offered a 1.6-liter inline-4 engine that produced a mere 74 horsepower and 88 pound-feet of torque. Paired with either a 4-speed manual or an optional 5-speed manual or 3-speed automatic, the car wasn't exactly quick or thrilling. Later, a sportier GSE model featured a slightly more powerful 2.0-liter engine from the Pontiac Sunbird, pushing 95 horsepower. But even this version couldn't compete with rivals like the Honda Civic Si, which offered superior performance and reliability for a similar price. The Le Mans' quality issues quickly became apparent. Built with cheap interior plastics, it had a noisy cabin and an uncomfortable ride. Many of the components were made with lower-quality Korean parts, which only worsened its reputation. Sales started relatively strong, with 60,000 units sold in its first year, but by 1993, the numbers had plummeted to 13,000 as consumer complaints grew. Even Canada wasn't impressed. There, the Le Mans was sold as the Passport Optima, with only minor success. By 1993, GM pulled the plug on the Le Mans, and Daewoo later attempted to enter the U.S. market independently, with similar results. The Le Mans debacle remains a cautionary tale of badge engineering gone wrong, marking it as one of the strangest and most failed GM cars in history. Bustleback Cadillac Seville. Was the Cadillac Seville's radical bustleback rear end a stroke of genius or a design disaster? In 1980, Cadillac took a bold leap to attract younger buyers with a new avant-garde look inspired by 1930s luxury cars. But instead of flocking to showrooms, buyers were baffled by the unconventional design, making the bustleback Seville one of GM's most failed cars. Introduced as the second generation of the Seville, this model was Cadillac's first to shift to a front-wheel drive platform, sharing components with the Eldorado. Under the hood, Cadillac experimented with 3 engines, each bringing its own set of problems. Initially, it came with the infamous 5.7-liter Oldsmobile diesel V8, which, at 120 horsepower, was one of the only diesel V8s in a passenger car. Plagued by reliability issues, it was soon replaced by Cadillac's V8 6.4 engine, a complex design that could deactivate cylinders to save fuel but often malfunctioned. By 1983, the Seville switched to the HT 4100 V8 engine, which, although more reliable than its predecessors, didn't impress with its 135 horsepower output. Inside, the Seville aimed to maintain Cadillac's luxury feel, with standard features like leather seats, power accessories, and a tilt and telescoping steering wheel. However, the digital dashboard introduced in 1981 proved unpopular with older buyers. And while the unique bustleback design offered 14.5 cubic feet of trunk space, it visually polarizing, drawing mixed reactions, and earning it a place on lists of weirdest car designs. Sales dropped sharply after its debut year, and by 1985, Cadillac quietly retired the bustleback style. Today, the bustleback Seville is remembered as one of GM's most experimental and least successful attempts to blend retro luxury with modern technology, a daring idea that ultimately missed the mark. California Corvette. Could a Corvette really disappoint? In 1980, the California version proved that even this American icon wasn't immune to emissions regulations. With California's strict pollution standards in place, GM faced a tough choice: halt Corvette sales in the state, or build a version that met the regulations. The result? A Corvette with a downsized, underpowered engine that left enthusiasts shaking their heads. For this model year, California Corvettes came with a 305 cubic inch V8 engine, borrowed from Chevrolet's sedans. Known as the LG4, this California engine delivered a disappointing 180 horsepower and 255 pound-feet of torque, which paled in comparison to the 190 horsepower of 350 engine available in other states. The LG4's 8.5-to-1 compression ratio and Rochester Quadrajet carburetor were paired with GM's command control system, an early emissions control setup with oxygen sensors to meet California standards. This downgrade was further hampered by the mandatory 3-speed automatic transmission, eliminating the option of a 4-speed manual and sealing the fate of its driving experience. The 305 engine was intended to keep the Corvette on the road in California, but the compromise left buyers frustrated. The Corvette's acceleration was sluggish, with a 0 to 60 miles per hour time closer to that of an economy sedan than a performance car. Even with a credit offered to compensate for the downgraded engine, Corvette fans weren't convinced, and many avoided the California model altogether. Fortunately, the 305-equipped Corvette was a one-year-only affair. In 1981, GM found a way to modify the 350 engine to meet California's standards, allowing the Corvette to reclaim some of its performance legacy. Today, the 1980 California Corvette is remembered as one of GM's most failed experiments, a low point in Corvette history brought on by regulations that left this sports car gasping for power. Chevrolet Camaro, Iron Duke. When you think Camaro, you probably envision a roaring V8, a car with the power and performance to back up its looks. But in 1982, Chevrolet shocked everyone by offering the Camaro with the Iron Duke, a 2.5-liter four-cylinder engine. Yes, a four-cylinder Camaro. This move was a response to rising fuel prices and stricter emissions regulations, but it left Camaro fans scratching their heads and disappointed on the road. The Iron Duke itself wasn't a new engine. Developed by Pontiac in the late 1970s, it was intended as a durable, fuel-efficient workhorse, primarily for compact cars and light trucks. With a cast-iron block and head, the Iron Duke was built for durability over thrills, producing just 90 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque. But in a sports car like the Camaro, it struggled. Paired only with a 3-speed automatic transmission, this engine could barely manage a 0 to 60 miles per hour time in under 20 seconds, making it painfully slow compared to other Camaros of the past. To make matters worse, the Iron Duke was notoriously rough and noisy, lacking balance shafts that would have reduced vibration. The engine's rattling at higher RPMs made for an uncomfortable drive and contributed to faster wear on various components. Critics of the time, and even today, mocked the Iron Duke Camaro for turning a legendary muscle car into something that could be left in the dust by economy sedans. Its reputation suffered further as the Iron Duke was prone to issues like overheating and head gasket failures, making it not only slow but also unreliable. The 1982 Iron Duke Camaro remains one of GM's most head-scratching decisions, a failed attempt to adapt a sports car to a new era of emissions and fuel economy. While it did offer fuel efficiency, it stripped the Camaro of what it stood for. The Iron Duke Camaro has gone down in history as one of the most failed GM cars, an engine that simply had no place in a muscle car. Oldsmobile and Buick Aerobacks. When GM downsized its A-body cars in 1978, they wanted a look that would stand out, inspired by European and Japanese trends. The result? The Oldsmobile Cutlass Salon and Buick Century Aeroback, a strange fastback design that immediately polarized buyers. But what GM saw as forward-thinking, the public saw as awkward and impractical, making these models some of the worst GM cars of the era. The Aerobacks sported a sleek, slanted rear that looked like a hatchback, but without the functionality. GM initially intended to make them hatchbacks, but to save on costs, they left the rear glass fixed, resulting in a tiny, narrow trunk opening that was both inconvenient and restrictive. The fixed rear windows created a claustrophobic feel for rear passengers, which only added to the car's unpopularity. Intended to bring an upscale European feel to Buick and Oldsmobile, the Aerobacks missed the mark entirely. Under the hood, these models offered various engines, including Buick's 3.8-liter V6 and Oldsmobile's two 60-cubic-inch V8. Despite the performance-themed options like the Oldsmobile Cutlass 442 and Buick Century Turbo, neither model delivered the power enthusiasts wanted. The Century Turbo was a 3.8-liter turbocharged V6, but its limited performance gains failed to make up for the styling disaster. Both Aerobac versions saw sales plummet by over 50% from 1977 to 1978, forcing GM to return to traditional three-box designs by 1980. Chevy El Camino, 5th generation. Who doesn't recognize the Chevy El Camino? This unique blend of car and truck had been a favorite since its debut in 1959. But by the 5th generation, launched in 1978, something went wrong. Despite its sleeker, modern styling and improved aerodynamics, this generation became one of GM's most failed cars in terms of sales. With a redesign based on the new Malibu chassis, the El Camino sported sharper edges and a unique 117-inch wheelbase, making it look more sophisticated than previous models. For the first time, it had its own chassis instead of borrowing from the Malibu. But despite the stylish updates, customers just weren't buying it like they used to. Ford had already discontinued its rival, the Ranchero, leaving the El Camino with little competition. But even this advantage couldn't stop declining sales. The 5th generation El Camino's engine lineup didn't help its case. The base model was powered by a 3.3 liters V6 that barely pushed out 95 horsepower. And for California buyers, a 3.8-liter V6 with 105 horsepower was standard. Optional engines included a 305 V8 with up to 145 horsepower and, briefly, a 350 V8 with 170 horsepower. In 1982, Chevy even added a 5.7-liter diesel V8, hoping to attract fuel-conscious buyers, but the diesel's poor reliability led to further disappointment. While the 5th Gen El Camino introduced some fun trim packages like the Black Knight, later renamed Royal Knight, and the 3-tone Conquista, none of these additions could lift its sales. Production continued through 1987, but the El Camino saw significant drops each year. By the end, GM's new mid-size S10 pickup was outselling the El Camino, and GM quietly ended its production. Chevrolet SSR. What happens when you mix a hot rod, a pickup truck, and a convertible into one vehicle? You get the Chevrolet SSR, a car that left buyers scratching their heads. GM introduced the SSR or Super Sport Roadster in 2003 with high hopes and a flashy reveal at the Detroit Auto Show. But by 2006, it was off the market, marking it as one of the most failed GM cars of the 2000s. Inspired by Chevy's 1940s pickups, the SSR had the look of a retro truck, complete with a convertible hardtop and swooping fenders. Underneath, it was built on the Trailblazer's GMT 360 SUV platform, which limited its usefulness as a truck. The SSR's bed was more decorative than practical, with a non-removable cover that turned it into a glorified trunk. The initial power plant was a 5.3-liter V8 producing 300 horsepower, but its hefty 4,700-pound weight meant it took 7.7 seconds to reach 60 miles per hour, a sluggish time for something intended to have muscle car appeal. In 2005, Chevy upgraded the engine to the 6.0-liter LS2 V8, pushing output to 390 horsepower and dropping the 0 to 60 time to 5.5 seconds. While this made the SSR faster, it was still hampered by high weight, tight interior space, and a lack of practicality. Additionally, at a starting price of $42,000, rising to nearly $50,000 with options, it was too expensive for what it offered. Buyers could get a high-performance sports car or a functional pickup for that price, making the SSR's appeal hard to justify. Though a flop at the time, the SSR has since gained a cult following among enthusiasts who appreciate its quirky design and nostalgic throwback to Chevy's past. But its high price, limited performance, and odd design choices sealed its fate as one of GM's weirdest and most short-lived experiments. GMC Envoy XUV. The GMC Envoy XUV proved it could. Released in 2004, the XUV was supposed to be the ultimate multi-use vehicle, combining the utility of a truck with the comfort of an SUV. But despite its unique sliding roof feature and clever design, the XUV ended up as one of GM's worst flops. What set the XUV apart was its retractable roof, allowing drivers to haul tall items in the cargo area, anything from furniture to plants. A watertight midgate behind the second row made it possible to clean out the back with a hose, making it great for messy cargo. GMC even designed a tailgate that could both swing out and drop down, offering flexibility that was nearly unheard of. These innovations positioned the XUV as a versatile choice for buyers who wanted the functionality of a pickup in an SUV package. Unfortunately, this versatility came at a cost. The retractable roof mechanism added about 90 pounds to the vehicle, raising the center of gravity and impacting handling. On top of that, the XUV could only be configured with the extended wheelbase, which normally would have included a third row of seats in a standard Envoy. Buyers of the XUV had to give up this seating option while still paying a premium price for the additional roof feature, making it a poor value for most families. The XUV's looks didn't help either. Former GM President Bob Lutz famously compared the rear design to a towering wedding cake, criticizing its awkward, top-heavy appearance. The retractable roof had reliability issues, leading to warranty complaints about leaks and mechanical failures. GM had hoped the XUV would make up a significant portion of Envoy sales, but with only 27,000 units sold across 2 years, it fell far short of expectations. Dustbuster Vans. Who could forget GM's Dustbuster vans? Introduced in 1990, the Chevrolet Lumina APV, Pontiac Trans-Sport, and Oldsmobile Silhouette were unlike anything else on the road. With a spaceship-like design, these minivans seemed ready for the future, except it was a future most buyers didn't want. The Dustbuster vans earned their nickname from their long, sloping windshields and narrow front ends, resembling handheld vacuum cleaners. While the design was striking, it had some major drawbacks. The raked windshield created a cavernous distance between the dashboard and the glass, making the driving position feel disconnected from the road. Inside, the massive dashboard and unique plastic-clad space frame construction aimed for an advanced look, but fell short on practicality and durability. The plastic panels, meant to prevent rust, instead resulted in inconsistent body gaps and struggled in extreme weather. Under the hood, these vans started with a 3.1-liter V6 engine producing only 120 horsepower, which left much to be desired for a vehicle weighing over 3,700 pounds. By 1992, GM offered an optional 3.8-liter V6 with 170 horsepower, but it was too little, too late. The vans never achieved the performance or fuel economy targets GM had set, and sales struggled. Chrysler's minivans were dominating the market, and GM's Dustbusters couldn't keep up despite their futuristic flair. In the end, the Dustbuster vans were redesigned in 1996 with a more conventional look. But by then, the damage was done, and these models were phased out as GM eventually bowed out of the minivan race. Today, the Dustbuster vans stand as one of GM's most failed attempts to break into the minivan market, a quirky, space-age experiment that missed the mark. The Chevrolet HHR. The Chevrolet HHR, GM's attempt at tapping into the early 2000s retro craze, was intended to recall the charm of the 1940s Suburban. But what did buyers think? Mostly, they thought it looked like a late attempt to cash in on Chrysler's PT Cruiser. Launched in 2005, the HHR's designer, Brian Nesbitt, was the same person behind the PT Cruiser, which only added to the comparison. Unfortunately for GM, by the time the HHR hit the market, the retro wave had lost momentum. Underneath, The HHR was built on GM's Delta platform, shared with models like the Chevy Cobalt. Power came from a 2.4-liter Ecotec engine producing 177 horsepower, paired with a 4-speed automatic transmission. The HHR also offered a performance-oriented SS version starting in 2008, which featured a 2.0-liter turbocharged engine generating a robust 265 horsepower and a 6-speed manual transmission. While the SS version added some excitement, it arrived too late to save the HHR from criticism over its uninspired performance and bland driving experience. Despite its quirks, the HHR wasn't an outright sales failure. It peaked with 105,000 units sold in 2007, but by 2011, its final year, sales had fallen to just over 37,000. Chevy offered a unique panel variant with rear seats removed and windows covered, targeting businesses. While practical, it wasn't enough to boost interest in the aging model. Today, the HHR is often remembered as one of GM's most failed cars, a symbol of missed timing in an already fading trend. So, there you have it, the most failed and weirdest GM cars ever made. From ambitious designs that went too far to cars that arrived just a little too late, GM's lineup is filled with stories of innovation, risk, and a few too many missteps. These vehicles remind us that sometimes, even the biggest names in the auto world can miss the mark. But what do you think? Did GM deserve a second chance with some of these models, or were they destined for failure from the start? Which car stood out to you as the strangest or most surprising flop? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey through GM's quirkiest cars, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Muscle Car Masters for more epic car stories and fascinating automotive history. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.